When Pusha T decided to speak, the entire game stopped. What started as Jim Jones casually throwing shade at Nas, calling the legend overrated and past his prime, turned into one of the most embarrassing clapbacks of his career. Pusha didn't rant, didn't tweet, didn't argue. He did what he's always done. He crafted a response so cold, so precise, that it didn't just sting, it shook the foundation of hip-hop itself. The beat dropped like thunder. And within the first few bars, everyone knew who he was talking about. Talk slick about the king. Get buried under the crown. He rapped. His delivery, calm but lethal. No names, no hashtags, but the tone made it clear. He was addressing the Harlem rapper who dared to question one of hip-hop's gods. And by the time Pusha T finished, there was no need for explanation. The message was simple. Disrespect to Nas wouldn't be tolerated. Not by the culture, and definitely not by the lyricists who still honor the craft. The internet erupted instantly. Fans called it the cleanest execution of 2025. Comment sections filled with fire. Emojis and phrases like "Jim picked the wrong one again" and "Pusha just ended another career," without raising his voice. Even Nas fans, normally quiet and reserved, flooded timelines with pride. Within hours, the track climbed to the top of every trending list. Pusha T had done what few could: defend a legend while reminding the world that he, too, was still one. The storm began the way most hip-hop drama does, with a podcast clip that spread faster than wildfire. Jim Jones was in the studio, lounging back in his chair, surrounded by his crew, speaking with that Harlem confidence that always drew attention. The conversation turned to Nas, the living legend. The poet laureate of Queensbridge, the man who had defined an era with Illmatic. But instead of praise, Jim went left. "Nas, cool and all," he said, "but let's stop acting like he's still that guy. He had his time. This new generation ain't checking for that no more." The room laughed. The host smirked, sensing viral content. But what Jim didn't realize was that his comment had just lit a fuse. And at the other end of that fuse stood Pusha T. Within hours, clips of the statement hit every platform. Twitter threads exploded. Instagram Reels racked up millions of views. Fans of Nas, one of the most respected rappers in hip-hop history, weren't having it. Comments poured in. Jim Jones talking reckless again. And bro, you can't disrespect Nas and think it's sweet. Even longtime industry insiders were taken aback. "You don't come for Nas," one veteran wrote. "That's like trying to spar with your sensei." At first, most assumed Pusha T would ignore it. He wasn't known for jumping into every argument. But when it came to protecting hip-hop's sacred names, those who built the very foundation he stood on, Pusha never stayed silent. And this time, he had a point to make. 3 days later, without warning, Pusha T dropped a track online. No promo, no teasers, no interviews, just a black and white image on his social pages with one caption: "For the culture." That was all it took. Within minutes, fans hit play. And the moment the beat kicked in, the air changed. It was haunting, minimalist, pure menace. Exactly the kind of instrumental that Pusha thrived on. Then his voice cut through like a blade. Calm, icy, surgical. Talk slick 'bout the architect. "You test in the design, legends built this temple. Don't play with the shrine." Everyone knew who he was talking about. He didn't say Jim's name once. He didn't have to. Every bar dripped with condescension and authority. The tone of a man who knew his pen was lethal enough to end careers without ever resorting to cheap theatrics. He continued, each line colder than the last. "They want relevance, I want reverence. You speak on gods 'cause you need their presence." The wordplay was immaculate, but it wasn't just the lyricism, it was the restraint. Pusha wasn't angry. He was disappointed. The tone carried the weight of someone protecting a legacy, not defending an ego. It was like watching a teacher scold a student for talking too loud in class. Within minutes of release, hip-hop Twitter went into meltdown mode. Fans were quoting lyrics, tagging Jim Jones. and comparing the moment to the infamous story of Adidas, the diss track that had once shattered Drake's armor. Pusha T did it again. One fan tweeted, "Jim poked the wrong bear." By the next morning, the track had hit over 5 million plays. Radio stations were breaking their playlists just to spin it. YouTube reactors couldn't upload fast enough. Every headline said the same thing: Pusha T destroys Jim Jones for dissing Nas. Meanwhile, Jim tried to keep his cool. He posted a vague Instagram story, a selfie in the gym with the caption, "We still workin', they still talkin'." It was a classic deflection, but the fans weren't fooled. Every comment under the post referenced Pusha's bars. One fan wrote, "Bro, you in the gym, but your ego's still limping." Another said, "Push just dropped a masterclass, and you posting sweat pics?" But what really hurt Jim wasn't just the backlash. It was who joined in. Legends across the game started siding with Pusha. MCs from Nas's generation, rappers from newer waves, even producers chimed in with respect for Pusha's response. That was grown man energy. One producer tweeted, "He didn't diss for clout. He defended the craft." And in a way, that was what separated Pusha from most of his peers. He didn't chase headlines, he created moments that lived in hip-hop lore. His words were chess moves, not sound bites. The brilliance of the track lay in its tone. Instead of trading insults, Pusha flipped the narrative into something bigger. He framed Jim's comments as symbolic of a larger problem: the lack of reverence for the artists, who built the very foundation of the culture. He rapped, "When they forget the pillars, the roof gone cave. Respect the architects before the house becomes a grave." That single bar became the talking point of the week. Even Nas himself, usually silent when drama brews, acknowledged it subtly. During a rare Instagram live session, he smiled when asked about the situation. "Man, I ain't worried about none of that," Nas said calmly. Real recognize real. Always has. That was enough. Fans flooded his comments with flame emojis. Writing the king don't even gotta respond, Pusha did it for him. Within the next few days, blogs dubbed Pusha T's response the Guardian verse. Wasn't just a diss, it was a message to the entire rap game, a reminder that certain names still carry sacred weight. Meanwhile, Jim's attempts to recover started falling flat. He did an interview trying to downplay the situation. "I ain't saying nothing disrespectful," he insisted. "I just said Nas don't move the youth like he used to. It's facts. Ain't no beef." But that justification didn't work. The internet had already chosen its narrative. And in that narrative, Pusha was the hero defending the culture's honor, while Jim was the loudmouth who overstepped his lane. Even his peers from Harlem went quiet. Nobody wanted to pick the wrong side in a battle involving Nas and Pusha T. By the end of the week, the verdict was unanimous. Jim Jones had officially become. Meanwhile, Pusha T stayed silent. No interviews, no social media posts, no public reaction. The absence of noise made the moment even heavier. Fans and critics alike started dissecting every lyric, every double entendre, turning the song into a scripture of respect for the craft. Think pieces popped up on major outlets. One article in Complex read, "Pusha T didn't just defend Nas, he defended hip-hop." In that same article, a writer summarized the moment perfectly. What Jim Jones called outdated, Pusha T called eternal. That's the difference between entertainers and artists. One wants applause. The other wants history. The quote went viral, spreading across platforms, finding its way into memes and even classroom discussions about hip-hop's generational divide. The more the conversation grew, the smaller Jim Jones began to look. Even fans who once praised his charisma now called for humility. "There's a line between confidence and arrogance," a veteran DJ said on air. "When you cross it, the universe sends someone like Pusha T to remind you where you stand." Still, Jim refused to bow. A week after the track dropped, he finally addressed it more seriously during a podcast appearance. Sitting back in a leather chair wearing shades and a hoodie, he said, "Everybody hyped about that verse, but I ain't feel no pressure. Y'all act like this man a god or something? He nice. Yeah, but I'm Harlem, bro. We don't fold. The host smiled awkwardly, trying to diffuse the tension. So no response track. Jim shook his head. Nah, I ain't giving nobody free promo. He can have that moment. But what Jim didn't realize was that refusing to respond didn't look strong. It looked defeated. Pusha T's silence was power. Jim's was insecurity. The streets could sense it. People started quoting one of Pusha's older lines, if you know, as a subtle jab at Jim's denial. Then came the freestyles. Underground rappers and up-and-comers began dropping their own verses inspired by Pusha's message. Some defended the old guard, others mocked Jim's arrogance. But every new verse only kept the spotlight on the one truth. Pusha T had shifted the energy back toward respect. Even Nas fans joined in on the fun. At a concert in Brooklyn during a quiet moment between songs, someone shouted, "They better stop playing with you, Nas." The rapper laughed, shook his head, and replied through the mic, "They learned." The crowd erupted, chanting his name. It was subtle, but everyone knew that one word, learned, said it all. The next morning, clips from the concert spread everywhere. Fans captioned it, "The King heard you, Pusha." At this point, even veteran MCs were weighing in. Busta Rhymes posted a photo of Nas and Pusha together, captioned, "Respect the builders, not the renters." Jadakiss reposted Pusha's track link with 3 words. Lesson delivered perfectly. Each of those endorsements was another nail in the coffin for Jim's credibility. The story started to evolve into something bigger, a generational reckoning. Was hip-hop losing its respect for the elders who created it? Had clout chasing replaced craft? Pusha T's verse had reopened a wound that had been festering for years. And while Jim Jones had become the face of that disrespect, everyone knew he wasn't the only one guilty. He just said what a lot of these new cats think. Styles P said during a live stream. That's why it hit so hard. Push wasn't just talking to him, he was talking to everybody. And that was the genius of it. Pusha didn't make it personal. He made it cultural. He turned one man's arrogance into a teachable moment for an entire generation. In Harlem, the reactions were mixed. Some defended Jim, arguing that he was just being honest about how times had changed. Others said he'd embarrassed the city. You can't come for Queen's greatest lyricists and expect Yonkers' sharpest one not to check you. One fan tweeted, "New York hierarchy still matters." Even radio hosts started ranking hip-hop's Sacred Five, Nas, Jay-Z, Pusha T, Eminem, and Kendrick Lamar, and using Jim's misstep as the cautionary example of what happens when you disrespect one of them. Meanwhile, Jim tried one more time to reclaim his dignity. He went live again, this time with a more serious tone. "I got love for Nas," he said. "I wasn't disrespecting the man. I was just saying the new generation don't connect with that sound the same. Y'all taking it too personal." But by then, it was too late. The narrative was set. His clarification didn't sound sincere. It sounded like damage control. Even his apology-light approach drew mockery. Memes flooded in with captions like, "It's not disrespect if I say sorry after." Back in Virginia Beach, where Pusha T was quietly working in the studio, the story didn't even seem to faze him. Insiders said he'd already moved on, recording new material for an upcoming project. "Push don't argue," one producer said. "He teaches. Once the lesson's out, he on to the next one." But what everyone understood now was that Jim Jones had become a symbol not just of arrogance, but of what happens when you talk louder than your work. The industry had shifted. The fans had spoken. Respect once again was the currency that mattered most. And while Jim tried to act unfazed, truth was clear. Pusha T had just rewritten the rules of engagement in hip-hop. You could clown, you could chase clout. You could stir controversy, but when the real penman decided to respond, the conversation changed permanently by the time a full month had passed since Pusha T's response. The ripples were still spreading through the culture. His verse had already turned into a textbook example of how to check arrogance with elegance. Every week, hip-hop commentators found a new layer to unpack. YouTube analysts broke down the flow patterns. English professors quoted his metaphors. What began as one man defending Nas had evolved into a generational statement about respect, discipline, and artistry. Jim Jones, meanwhile, had become the reluctant centerpiece of a lesson he never intended to teach. He continued releasing snippets of music and lifestyle clips. But no one cared about his fashion or workouts anymore. Every comment circled back to that moment. "Push buried you with class," one fan wrote under a new video. Another said, "You can't muscle your way out of poetry." Even Harlem supporters who once applauded his bravado started urging him to stop fighting a losing perception war. Pusha T never responded publicly again, and that silence became the loudest message of all. It created an aura around him, the image of an elder statesman who didn't chase clout, who let his art and integrity do the talking. At shows, when the opening beat of the diss track hit, the crowd would roar before a single word was spoken. In interviews, younger rappers mentioned it as the moment they started taking writing seriously again. Nas himself remained characteristically quiet, but insiders said he'd privately reached out to thank Pusha for the gesture. "You didn't have to do that," he allegedly told him, "but you reminded them why the craft matters." For Nas, who had spent decades balancing respect and irrelevance debates, the defense wasn't just flattering, it was symbolic. It proved that even after 30 years, his influence still sparked fire in the pen of another master. As weeks turned to months, Meanwhile, Pusha T's legacy only deepened. Critics hailed him as the last of a dying breed, a lyricist who treated the microphone like scripture, who could defend culture without descending into pettiness. His name began appearing beside Nas, Jay-Z, and Rakim in discussions about pure craftsmanship. The track that started as a warning to one man had become a love letter to an entire art form. In interviews, fellow artists echoed that sentiment. "What Pusha did wasn't about beef," said Common. "It was about protecting the lineage. Hip-hop is built on lineage, teachers, students, disciples. You don't disrespect your teachers." Even Kendrick Lamar reportedly played the record in the studio, telling his team, "That's how you talk to the culture." By late summer, the wave had settled into quiet respect. Pusha and Nas appeared together at a charity concert in New York. When Pusha performed his verse, the crowd went silent until the final line, "Respect the architects before the house becomes a grave." As he stepped aside, Nas walked out to thunderous applause. No handshake, no grand speeches, just mutual nods of acknowledgement. Cameras flashed, fans screamed, and that one gesture closed the loop. The teacher and the defender, side by side. Jim Jones watched from afar. He didn't attend the event, but he reposted a clip of their performance with a caption that surprised everyone. "Salute to the legends. All love." It wasn't an apology, but it was humility, the kind of gesture that told people he had learned something from the chaos. For the first time in months, fans responded positively. "That's the energy we wanted," one wrote. "Growth looks good on you." Over time, that live moment, that viral clash, began to fade from the headlines. But its echo lingered in every studio and cypher, where younger rappers now spoke with a new sense of respect. The phrase "don't pull a Jim Jones" became slang for thinking before speaking on the greats. Pusha's name, already etched in hip-hop history, was now associated with something more than diss mastery. He was the guardian of cultural memory. In retrospect, it wasn't humiliation that defined the story. It was restoration. The verse didn't bury Jim Jones, it buried the casual disrespect that had started creeping into the culture. It reignited the idea that legends deserve their flowers while they can still smell them. And that reverence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. By the time the year ended, the track had taken on mythic status. DJs opened sets with snippets of it, not as beef anthems, but as reminders of standards. Nas's streams surged again, Pusha's respect soared, and Jim's silence matured into redemption. The hierarchy of hip-hop had been realigned not by fame, but by the weight of words. And in that quiet balance, one truth remained undeniable. When Pusha T spoke, the culture listened. And this time, it learned when the echoes faded and the debates cooled down. One truth remained: respect will always outlast relevance. Pusha T didn't humiliate Jim Jones just for shock value. He reminded the world that hip-hop has roots, rules, and a lineage that deserves to be honored. In defending Nas, he defended the integrity of the entire culture. A culture built on lyrics, discipline, and truth. Now it's your turn. Do you think Pusha T was right to step in and check the disrespect? Or did Jim Jones have a point about evolution and generational change? Can a new wave ever rewrite the rules made by legends? Drop your thoughts below, because as this moment proved in hip-hop, the pen still decides who stands tall and who fades into noise.